Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the local review body. Can I first of all apologise for keeping you waiting? We had some IT difficulties locating one planning advisor, but we've decided to start off and deal with items in a slightly different order. Anyway, my name is Councillor Lewis Simpson. I'm the convener of the local review body, and I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Councillor David Illingworth and Councillor Willie Wilson, who are volunteers from the Planning and Development Management Committee. And I'm very grateful for their participation both in this meeting and the previous one, considering item 5.1, and in accompanying me on a site visit. We're also joined by Mr. Colin Elliott, who is the legal advisor for the local review body, and by Mr. Danny Williams of Committee Services. So we move to declarations of interest. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest by members on any item on the agenda today? Councillor Illingworth.
I have no declarations of interest.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
No declarations of interest.
Right, and I have none either. We can now move ordinarily. We've now moved to the minutes of the previous meeting, but understand there are some procedural issues with this, and we will defer consideration of that minute until the next meeting. Okay. Now, as I said earlier, it's my intention to vary the order of business today and to move first of all to item 5.1. And this is an application we have previously considered and for the erection of a dwelling house and change of use of former reservoir building to form ancillary accommodation, former water reservoir, Blairgowrie Road, Dunkeld. Can I ask you, Mr. Elliott, to take us through this item?
Thank you, convener. What I'll do, members, is I'll go through what is normally done, the photographic presentation, applicant's case, the report of handling, and I'll also cover the further information you've received recently, plus some more issues. I appreciate that's going to be quite lengthy, but it's maybe worth recapping the position and updating it, given that it was 17th of August since you last dealt with this and deferred. Now, members, detailed planning permission is sought for the erection of a dwelling house at the former water reservoir building at Blairgowrie Road, Dunkeld. There is an existing planning permission for the conversion and extension of the former reservoir building in a traditional pitched roof form. The proposal seeks to replace and replicate that permission with a new build house in different orientation and linear flat roof form. The proposed house would be some 20 metres from the reservoir building at its nearest and some 45 metres away at its most distant. The proposed single-storey house would be some 7 metres wide and 38 metres long, set on stilts, and is described as unashamedly contemporary. The walls would be clad in timber and the roof would have a green wildflower treatment. If we could go to the photographs, plans for the proposal are in the papers. The most useful to have before you, members, when viewing the photographs are the site plan as proposed on page 403 of your papers, and to a lesser extent the location plan on page 401. Now, I appreciate you've had your site visit, but it's obviously maybe useful just to recap through the photographs. Those photographs commence from the most westerly point of the site before proceeding into the site itself. Later on, there are views looking out of the site and then views from the A923 Dunkeld to Blairgowrie Road and its relationship with the site. Now, the first photograph that you see here is taken from the extreme western end of the site. If you look at page 403 of your papers, it's the pointed end of the site at the bottom of page 403. The red lines on the photograph mark the boundary of the site. Now, next photograph. This next photograph is taken a bit further in, down the path you saw in the first photograph. The building seen on the right is a neighbouring property, Ty Greenich, that's the outbuilding for that, which is marked on the plan on page 401 of your papers. The yellow line denotes the approximate position of the proposed dwelling that you're dealing with today. Next photograph. This is taken a bit further in, looking towards a former reservoir building. Next photograph. The view moves to the right. You can just see the edge of the former reservoir building on the left in this photograph, and again with the yellow, the dotted line, the approximate position of the proposed house on the right. If we could move to the next photograph. Looking further to the right again, more of the approximate line of the proposed house can be seen. And on to the next photograph. This again looks further right. This time the other end of the position of the proposed house can be seen. Next photograph. In this photograph, having moved further up the path, this is taken back towards the original starting point and to the neighbouring property Greenock and its outbuilding. Next photograph, from the same point, but the view moves further north to the former reservoir building, and again you see the approximate position of the house. The next photograph has stepped up slightly physically from the previous photograph, and this gives an idea of the approximate position of the proposed house. And then again, the next one, by stepping up a bit more, the position of the proposed house and its relationship with the former reservoir building is seen. And next one, this time we've moved further up the slope again and see the overhead line way leave when looking northwest down to Greenock. Or Greenock, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Now, next one. This time the photograph shows a path out with the site looking south. That path can be seen on the plan on page 401 of your papers as it heads towards other properties, Verenag and the Nuke. And next one. This view is out with the site but still on land within the applicant's control. The property seen is Verenag. And the next photograph. The next sequence of photographs are taken from the Blairgowrie to Dunkeld Road, which you can see there. And again, it might be helpful to have the plan on page 403 before you. This photograph is taken from the southeast corner of the site nearest the road and is looking north back up the road. Additional trees potentially affected by the visibility display to the south of the proposed access are shown. Next one. Now, this next photograph is taken from the proposed access looking south back towards where the previous photograph was taken. The easiest way to locate where this photograph is taken is to find the car on the bend on the road on the plan on page 403. Now, next photograph. Taken from the same position, which is the access, this photograph turns into the site and shows the proposed access and the parking area. Next photograph. This view then shows, still from the same position, shows the road bending away westwards from the proposed access. Next photograph. Further round the bend that you saw, is a view back into the site and the position of the proposed house. Next, we have a view of the former reservoir building from the road level. And finally, final photograph, we go back to a previous photograph showing the position of the proposed house and the former reservoir building behind. Now, members, the applicant's case. The background is the detailed planning permission was granted for the conversion of the former reservoir building to a dwelling house in 2010, renewed in 2013, and subject to a further detailed permission in 2016, and is therefore a significant material planning consideration in assessment of this proposal. It is emphasised by the applicants with reference to a previous legal case that the applicant is entitled to fall back on the extant consent if permission for the current proposal is not granted. Regards to the proposal itself, the applicant wishes to revoke the extant consent and have this replaced with the current proposal to alter the location of the approval within the site. That is to replace the proposed conversion of the reservoir building with a new build dwelling in an alternative and more elevated position, as you've seen. Other benefits of revising the development of a house on this land would include reducing the building footprint, the length of the driveway, the scale of the engineering operation and the potential risk of flooding, avoiding the need to waterproof the basement of the reservoir building, securing a more feasible build and providing a better standard of accommodation and outlook for the prospective occupants. The site and its surroundings have been the subject of a detailed appraisal, including the updated tree survey contained in the review papers. The site is identified on an ancient woodland inventory, which acts as a provisional guide. The detailed tree survey of some 197 individual trees in one tree group, where birch and sycamore predominate, has been undertaken. The officer's view that 63 trees would need to be felled is contested. The proposal would involve the felling of 39 trees, which is 2 less than in the approved proposal. The marginal change in the quality of the trees affected by each proposal would be more than compensated for by the net gain in improving the biodiversity of the site. The site is currently assessed as having low ecological value despite the ancient woodland designation. The limited ecological value is partly due to the dominance of non-native beech and sycamore, and it is envisaged that the enhancement of biodiversity would be realised mainly through the proposed woodland management plan, the eradication of rhododendron ponticum, and investment in protection of trees from deer browsing. This assessment is supported by the findings of independent forestry and environmental consultants. Concerning regarding trees was not raised at the pre-application stage. The woodland management plan also provides for the planting of approximately 280 trees. None of these benefits could be achieved through the extant permission, which provides for only 13 new trees. In conclusion, from the applicant's position, the development is seen as having a net overall positive effect on the woodland, which is currently in an unfavourable condition. Consequently, the applicant contests the assessment that the proposal is contrary to LDP2, Policy 40A and B, which seeks to protect and enhance woodland, and Policy 41, which seeks to protect wildlife and habitats. Undertaking the extant permission due to a combination of more extensive engineering operations, greater risk of flooding, limited tree planting is viewed as offering significantly less biodiversity benefit in the current proposal. The third reason for refusal refers to the proposal being contrary to LDP2 Policy 19 concerning housing the countryside. Again, this concern was not raised during pre-application discussions, where the sole consideration was the relocation of the house within the site. The planning officer accepts that this proposal would move the house away from the area of significant flood risk. And in conclusion, and this is conclusion from the applicant's position, any impacts and policy considerations need to be balanced against the significant prospective benefits to the woodland that can only be secured through the current proposal. Turning now to the report of handling. The site contains a former reservoir building that has planning permission to be converted and extended to form a dwelling. This new proposal from the new owner seeks consent for a new build house on higher ground due to the flood risk associated with the permitted location. The applicant is willing to revoke the existing planning permission if consent is granted for this proposal. It is envisaged that the reservoir building would then only be used for ancillary accommodation or purposes relating to the new build house. The applicant sees the proposal as offering benefits overall to the biodiversity of the woodland in terms of the impact of the development and future woodland management work. These proposals were discussed at pre-application stage. At that time, consideration of the additional and comparable impact on trees, compliance with housing countryside policies and guidance in justification for substitute of the planning permission were seen as the key issues. Although near Dunkeld, members, the site does not abut the settlement boundary. It lies adjacent to a building group to the west. The proposal is not assessed as being supported as an extension to the building group. The position of the proposed house within an area of woodland is viewed as manufacturing a residential plot, requiring the removal of a significant number of trees, rather than constituting a definable site in accordance with the housing and countryside guidance. Regarding the potential for flooding, the proposed relocation is understandable, with the level of risk at the former reservoir building being assessed as increasing since permission was first granted in 2008. I think it was actually issued in 2010, but it was a 2008 application. While the housing and countryside guidance recognise that there can be circumstances where existing houses are relocated due to flood risk, there is no similar provision for unimplemented permissions. In this case, accommodating such a relocation might be seen as a pragmatic approach, subject to the alternative site being suitable, the revocation of the existing permission and establishment of a legal agreement for long-term woodland management. However, the guidance is clear that clearing woodland to create a site is not supported. It is noted that with the conversion permission, most of the tree removal related to the access. By contrast, the relocated housing site would contain most of the trees to be removed under that proposal. The Council Supplementary Planning Guidance and LDP2 Policy 40A seeks to retain and protect trees and ancient woodland. As upland birchwood, the site is also a priority habitat. The conversion proposal would remove about 40 trees, mainly for the access and visibility displays. The proposal would remove about 39 trees for the access and the footprint of the house, and an additional 13 trees due to the condition. Potentially 11 further trees may require removal or lopping to secure the visibility displays. While the number of trees affected are broadly comparable, different trees are involved, and following more survey work undertaken by the applicant and detailed discussion, it is considered that the proposal would have a significantly greater impact on the woodland. This development also raises the prospect of further tree removal to provide a more open outlook or safer residential environment for future occupants. The construction process may also result in further trees being lost. The applicant's willingness to enter into a legal agreement for woodland management is recognised and has been explored thoroughly. This is not seen as workable as providing a robust means of securing a long-term management of the woodland, especially as the current owner's aspirations may not be shared by future occupants and owners. A legal agreement would also not overcome the officer's concern regarding the clearing of woodland to provide a house plot contrary to the Housing Countryside Guidance and LDP2 Policy 40A and the associated Policy 40B regarding the protection of woodland habitats. Regarding design, when viewed in isolation from these considerations, the proposed house is seen as being of a high quality, contemporary design and capable of being accommodated in its setting without having an adverse visual impact on the locality or the national scenic area. While there are a high number of objections, it is not assessed as raising direct overlooking or privacy issues or problems of light pollution despite the extensive areas of glazing, the nearest property being some 60 metres away. It is noted that the proposed access visibility displays do not meet current standards, even with the removal or lopping of further trees and the impact of the bend in slowing traffic speeds. It is recognised that the formation of the access is a part of the existing planning permission. In terms of representation of members, there were 14 letters of objection, key issues raised, as you'll be aware, contrary to the Development Plan and Housing Countryside Supplementary Guidance 2020, loss of public footpath, concerns over vehicular access, loss of trees and impact on biodiversity, impact on visual amenity in national scenic area and light pollution. 12 letters of support, of which the key issues raised are enhances the character, environment and biodiversity of the area, economic development, quality of design, improvements to access and public access provision. The local community council also have offered support on the following grounds: that the principle has already been established for a dwelling, improvement on existing permission in terms of visual impact, acceptable impact on trees and biodiversity, and need for local homes. Now, members, that kind of is really the presentation that I did before. That's a reminder. But in terms of the further information before you, members, you'll recall deferring this review application for further information on 17th August. You now have the further information before you, which is page 607 onwards in your papers. There is firstly a comment from the Tree and Biodiversity Officer on the need for a bat survey and the time period for a survey to be carried out. Then you have a plan from the applicant of the proposed diverted route of the path that goes through the site. Then, in response to the Tree and Biodiversity Officer's comments, the applicant has submitted a bat survey. You may wish to note the survey was not carried out in the time period given by the Tree and Biodiversity Officer. However, within the survey, I've noted that it stated the timing of the survey would not change the conclusions. So that's a matter for you. Lastly, you also have comment from the Community Green Space on the plan for the proposed diversion of the path. Excuse me, members. Now, I would like to lastly address another issue, that further information has been received that was not requested by you in the previous deferral, and I think you'll be aware of some of that. As you'll be familiar, members, the procedure for the local review body is set out in legislation. We must follow those regulations. At this stage in a review application, further or new information should not be taken into consideration by you unless you have requested it and relevant parties such as the applicant have had the opportunity to comment on that information. Any information should have a significant material bearing on the planning merits of the review application before you today. Now, I'm aware, members, that 2 interested parties who objected to the original planning application have emailed you, all members of the LRB, directly. One interested party has referred to the removal of a wooden bench from the path. He's also they've given views on the options available to the applicant and commented on the preservation of the wood. The second interested party has referred to the removal of seating, the application of herbicides, vandalism to the Victorian water tank and land contamination issues. Now, subsequent to the 2 interested parties emailing, the applicant has also written, not to you, but to LRB administration, asking that reply comments to the 2 interested parties are shared with you to correct the record. Now, need to be clear, members, and that information is not formally before you today. It's not in your papers and should be disregarded as it presently stands. However, if you consider that this information may have a significant material bearing on your decision, you would require to defer this review for that additional information to be produced to you and to decide if any relevant parties should be given the opportunity to comment on that information. Now, in addition, members, there's one more matter. Members will be aware that the papers, from the papers, the report of handling, that Transport Planning objected to the planning application, which is now the subject of this review. And now I understand that Transport Planning are not objecting to the application. Now, should you wish to take that into account, you would require to defer to seek further detailed information from Transport Planning on their position on the application. If you do not, then if you do not defer, you disregard the information and proceed on the information you have before you. Now, of course, last thing I would say, Convener, when considering whether or not to defer the application for further information, this should be done before you proceed to actually determine the application. You'll be familiar with that. Convener, I have nothing more to add.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Elliott. Can I ask colleagues, are there any questions for Mr. Elliott on the application for review? Councillor Illingworth.
One question actually. Do any of the trees on the site have a tree preservation order at the moment?
Not to my knowledge, Councillor Illingworth, there's nothing within the tree survey. The tree survey grades the trees, but I'm not aware of any TPOs on the site.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. Councillor Wilson, have you any points?
Thanks, Convener. Just referring to Mr. Elliott's advice that the Planning Road Service staff have given us an update. Could you maybe just repeat what that update was again, please, Mr. Elliott?
As much as I can say, Councillor Wilson, is that you know from the papers, as it presently stands before you, in the report of handling, it's detailed, and you also have the consultation response. Transport Planning objected to this application. Now, to be clear, as carefully as I can, I'm not wanting to put my views into it, but in the report of handling, the officer recognised that there was an existing permission for the same access and did not refuse on Transport Planning grounds, on the road access ground. The refusal was on other grounds. My understanding is now that Transport Planning are no longer objecting to the application, but you do not have those details before you as to the reasoning for that. So if you want to take that into account, you need to defer to get an updated email or memorandum from Transport Planning. If you consider that you have enough information before you already, taking account of all the circumstances, then you wouldn't defer and you would proceed to determine the application. It's a matter for you which you wish to do.
Okay, but just to be quite clear, Mr. Elliott, the LRB did not request additional information from Transport Planning.
That is correct. Just like same with the 2 interested parties in the applicant's response. Okay. What I've referred to latterly is all extra information that has not been requested by you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Mr. Ellis, I have a couple of points of clarification, if I may, because we do have nearly 400 pages of information here, and we have considered this matter in the past. Can I just be absolutely clear on the subject of the BAT survey? Am I right in thinking that the BAT survey that has been produced for us does not follow the usual guidance required?
Convener, what I would say on that is you have before you the when you deferred, you sought clarification from the Tree and Biodiversity Officer. It's page 607 in your papers, and the last main paragraph, she makes it clear that a BAT survey is required, and also that the published best practice and during the correct time, the best practice is between April and mid-August, which would be 2022. And if you look at the BAT survey, which is on to page 612 onwards, top of page 613, what I noted was that the survey was carried out by a team of surveyors between 31st August and 15th September. So you can instantly recognise that that is not within the time period given by the Tree and Biodiversity Officer. The BAT survey, there is a comment later on. It does go on to say that the timing of the survey would not change the conclusions of the survey. As much as I can say, it's a matter for you as to how you consider that BAT survey.
Right, thank you, Mr. Elliott. And I think also, following on Councillor Illingworth's point about the lack of any TPOs, would I be right in thinking that we have no protection and no way of offering any way of protecting the trees that are there were we minded to grant permission?
That would be difficult, Convener. The main route would be through TPOs, and that is in a separate assessment process and a separate decision that's not within your gift. Now, I will say the applicant is proposing a woodland management plan. The difficulty with that is whether it could be conditioned or put into a section 75. But that would be an evolving situation, and of course it would be difficult for you to either condition or put section 5 because of the complexities of it, and it would be evolving, and it could be a new owner, and also there would be bits outside with this site as well. I won't go into a lot of detail, but I appreciate the applicant is offering that up. But the standard condition you would be aware of is a landscaping condition with replanting within 5 years rather than a full woodland management plan.
So just to be absolutely clear for us then, if we were to accept the woodland management plan, that's a long-term plan over which we would have no actual control.
Speaking as a legal advisor, I think it would. I have never not seen a condition or section 75 covering such a situation before, and you have to bear in mind that I think it would be open to challenge. You know, given its such long-term nature, then you know, the ownership could change, and of course practices can change, and it is unfortunately a complex situation. So from my own legal advisor position, I think it would be difficult for you to condition or require the woodland management plan through a section 75.
Right, and then just finally, Mr. Elliott, this may not be such an easy one. It's mentioned in the papers that the proposed development site is a manufactured site. Is there a definition? I mean, I've been there twice to have a look around. Is there a definition of a manufactured site rather than an actual site that might assist us in this one?
Strictly speaking, within the housing and countryside policy, I don't recall the word manufacturer being defined. That is the appointed officer's wording. I think what he's trying to get across there is it's not a site that's readily available for a house to be constructed. There would have to be the removal of the trees, in his view.
But thank you very much indeed, Mr. Elliott. That's me satisfied. Any further questions from my colleagues, Councillor Illingworth or Councillor Wilson?
No.
Councillor Illingworth?
No, thank you.
That's fine. So, members, can we proceed to determine this application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Illingworth.
I require no more information.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Convener, I think we have ample information to make a decision, and given that we had the valuable site visit, I think we can proceed to make a decision. We need to take a decision on what we do about the information we've received recently that Mr. Elliott referred to, Convener. I don't know when you intend to bring that into the equation.
Well, I think I will perhaps seek some guidance from Mr. Elliott on that, but I certainly am satisfied that I have sufficient information to decide this matter today. Mr. Elliott, can you perhaps give us some advice on Councillor Wilson's point?
Yes, Convener, you're actually deciding right now for the whole application whether you want to proceed or not. So that would include my reference to the fact that other information has been received that you did not request. And I appreciate that you may not have been fully referring to that earlier, but at the moment all three of you have said that you have enough information to proceed. So you would not be deferring for that additional information.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. You content with that clarification, Councillor Wilson?
I'm content, but I want just to make it clear that the information that wasn't requested by the LRB is not been taken into account in our decision-making process today. I think that refers to the representations from by email and also the contribution from transport planning. Just want to make that quite clear, Convener.
I think that's very helpful, councillors. I think it's very important that particularly the members of the public recognise that we make a decision on the papers before us, and that we don't take don't give any other matters any consideration. It can only be on the matters before us, and it is unfortunate perhaps that some of this information has not come through the proper channels. We have to be very careful on the local review body to follow the rules exactly, and we have Mr. Elliott here to make sure that we do. So it's very important that everyone involved follows the rules as laid down. Thank you. So I think we can now move, colleagues, to assess the case and move to debate. Having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth and Ross local development plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, I will start us off on this one, colleagues. I have to say, colleagues, that the first time I visited the site, I had to go back to the car and double check all the papers I had with me and the map to make sure I had the right place, because I feel I do agree with the appointed officer's conclusion that this site is to be manufactured. I'm also concerned that it is on an area of ancient woodland, and it's important, I think, to recognise that it's the land that's ancient woodland, not necessarily the trees. And I feel that whilst I can understand the extension to an existing building that's there, I find it very difficult to justify a new build as in effect some distance away on a wooded hillside. I've looked at the papers very carefully and considered the information, and I feel that on balance, and it's always a balance with these ones, I think, colleagues, on balance, I'm minded to agree with the reasons for refusal on page 373 and 374, and I may articulate that further with one or two items of tidying up when the time is appropriate. But I think it is my view that we should uphold the refusal on this occasion. Councillor Illingworth, may we have your view?
Yeah, my view is that I would like the application to go ahead. I think the trees on the site, none of the trees on the site have a TPO on them, and that means that the owner can fell the trees or harvest the trees at any time. I think the building itself is contemporary and will add to the will have a theatrical effect, and it will be an addition to the local environment. I think that the existing planning application that has been approved is a material consideration, and there will be somebody living on the site, whatever, a family living on the site, whatever decision we make. I think that the additional additional impact of the new building will not be significant. I would like to see a landscaping plan included as one of the conditions. I would like to see a rerouting of the path as one of the conditions, and I would like to see the existing planning consent revoked as one of the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. Councillor Wilson, may we have your view?
Thanks, Convener. Yes, indeed. This has been quite a detailed application, and it's received a lot of detailed consideration both by the LRB and many others, including the local community. And I'm acutely aware that there's a high level of interest in it, and therefore we've I think been meticulous, all three of us, in our consideration of it. I have come to the conclusion, like yourself, Convener, on balance, that I would go with the planning service report for refusal. There may well be some tidying up, as you've alluded to, Convener, but I don't know what your tidying up is, so we'll listen to that carefully in early course. I think it's particularly instructive to have gone on the site visit. It's a challenging site, and nobody, I think, would argue with that at all. I have a concern about the amount of tree removal, and I think I just have a feeling that whilst it may be an attractive proposition to put this innovative building on this location, I don't think it's necessarily it fits in with our planning policies as they're articulated in the report of handling and in the summary that Mr. Elliott gave us. We've had a whole phalanx of information on this, which has all been useful and all been taken into account, and we had a very useful site visit, and my conclusion is, on balance, to go with the refusal.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wilson. So I think democracy is alive and well. There are different views, which is, I think, very important. Can I just say, Ms. Elliott, if I could just point out one or two little items of tidying up, if I may, and then we can consider if you have any further advice. I think I'm on page 373, the reasons for refusal, and on the second line, I think we should add that it's a designated ancient woodland.
Yep.
And as ever, the second bottom line, I think there's an unnecessary adopted there, which I would like removed.
Okay.
And again, in the second one, there's an unnecessary adopted there. I think also perhaps in the second paragraph we might also put that the woodland management plan is simply a proposal, so perhaps we should put in a proposed woodland management plan. Okay. And when we get to paragraph 3, there's again an unnecessary adopted on line 2, and when it refers to the countryside guide, I think it should be a supplementary guidance. There, I think. Yes. Perhaps we might see if Councillor Wilson agrees or has any further points, and then we can revert to you, Mr. Elliott.
I'm content to go along with these minor wording amendments. They don't change the substance of my view, but they're really tidying up. I'm content with these, Convener.
So can I ask you, Mr. Elliott, are you happy that you have everything you require for this?
Yes, Convener, I think that's quite clear that you are refusing by majority to slightly amended grounds 1, 2 and 3, as you've covered. And just to be clear in Councillor Illingworth's position, the way I picked it up is Councillor Willameth. Although I think it would be correct technically to say that although it doesn't quite fit policy, you gave justification as to why it could be granted. Okay, thank you, Convener.
You're happy with that, Mr. Elliott? So if I could say to the applicant that I recognise this will not be the answer that you were looking for, but I can assure you that the 3 members and officers have given due consideration to all the information we received, and over 2 meetings have given it a very thorough examination, and in my own case have visited the site on 2 occasions, and we have all visited together on another occasion. So it's had a good airing. And we look forward to seeing what is going to happen now to the existing application, perhaps. So I understand, if we can move now, if I can just check with Mr. Williams that we have now made contact with Stirlingshire, have we? And Mr. Harrison has been beamed up to us, so that's fine. So we can now go back to the original order of business. And return to application 4.1, which is an application for the erection of a dwelling house in principle, land 100 metres northeast of Tressate House, Strathtummel. So, Mr. Harrison, may I ask you to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, Convener, and my apologies for the difficulties we had earlier. As you say, this is a planning application in principle for the erection of a house at land 100 metres northeast of Tressate House, Strathtummel. The site is currently grazing land. It slopes up steeply from the public road to a more gently sloping area identified as the indicative position for a house. It also slopes to the east to the wooded ravine containing the Alt Tressig burn. Agricultural land, including the adjoining field in the applicant's ownership, lies to the north. Now, I'll just take you through some photographs now, but you like to have page 71 onwards to provide yourself with a location plan and a site plan. The general sequence of the photographs will be approaching from Strathtummel Inn, which is what you see in the first photograph here, then the Alt Tressig Bridge, then the lower level of the site as seen from the public road, then the upper level of the site and its context in relation to other properties and the landscape. So I say this is us looking towards Lochtummel Inn in the first photograph there, and you can see there is some development immediately beyond the inn as well. This is us looking generally in an easterly direction. We'll be turning round from that easterly direction and start to move towards the west now in the next photograph. And this is the closest house to the inn, which I think is identified on your location plan. And as you'll see, there's an access slightly to the left of that photograph. And if we move from there into the next photograph, we'll move into that access, which takes you to the land which is intervening between the 2 properties there, Larrigbeg and Stallig. That is one of the sites referred to by the applicant in the papers as having planning permission for a dwelling house. We then go back onto the public road in the next photograph, and this is us now looking in that westerly direction I mentioned. And the general sequence of photographs from here will progress from here down to, shall we say, the distance that you see there, the far distance, which is basically the base of the application site, and you may just be able to make out a small peak of the house, which we'll see later, which is Tressig, in the V of that outline on the skyline there. So that gives you an indication of the distance to that. So if we go up the road a little bit in the next photograph, this is us now looking from the public road into Stallig, which you can see is set slightly above the road, above the verge that is. And from there again, in the next photograph, we go down the road a little bit further again, and we're now beginning to pick up Tressig House in that more elevated position you can see. And on the right hand side of the photograph, you can see some of the trees associated with the burn, which is in the dip, as you can see where you see some of the so you see some of the poles associated with the signs. So from there, again, we go up the road a little bit further in the next photograph. This takes us to the bridge over the burn. They're still looking in the westerly direction, and as you can see, we're now looking up the slope towards Tressig House as it stands. From there, we move again a little bit further up, and we're beginning to pick up the application site here. This is us now looking directly at the bridge and the trees in the ravine. The burn is set quite well below the road level at this point, so it wasn't actually practical to take a photograph of the burn itself, but you'll maybe note that the application site extends to the centre line of the burn, and so it incorporates some of the trees we're looking at in this photograph as well. Swinging round slightly to the left of that photograph, we now pick up the lower part of the application site as seen from the public road. You might notice and take a sort of an orientation as far as some of the poles on the site are concerned, because they do crop up in later photographs. So everything you're looking at basically in that photograph is the lower part of the application site. There will of course be photographs from the upper level. What you see is the skyline in later photographs. Swinging round again a little bit to the left of that photograph and moving back up the hill, back up the road I should say, we're now looking back down towards the bridge itself and that lower corner of the application site. Now we'll have a sequence of photographs which will, shall we say, swing round from that position on the public road. So if we go to the next photograph, we catch the main body of that lower part of the application site. And then if we swing round to the next photograph, we take on the remainder of that lower part of the application site. Swinging round again in the next photograph, we start to look up the road in that westerly direction, and we now step out with the application site to that wooded embankment there. If we move on from there up the road in the next photograph, we get a chance to look back down towards the bridge and the frontage of the application site and the woodland in the ravine. And then if we go to the next photograph, we step back and again a little bit further up the road, looking right down the slope, as it were, towards the ravine. And then again, we move to the next photograph and we pick up the access to both Tressig House and the proposed site, of course. So from there, we will move up the access. And the first photograph is of Tressig House itself, which we saw on more at that elevated position in earlier photographs. And then swinging round to the right of that photograph, on the other side of the track, we pick up the application site and the indicative position of the access into the application site, which you'll see in the plan. Swinging round again to the right in the next photograph, we look across the application site down towards the road where we were earlier, and then beyond that, of course, towards the loch itself. Swinging round again to the right in the next photograph, looking across and down the access track, and you may know that there's a house called Woodland on the opposite side of the road. Is basically a house set in mature woodland, as you can see in this photograph. Swinging round again to the right of that photograph, right round, we catch the upper part of the application site, and of course the landscape beyond. Swinging round again to the right of that photograph, we look across the application site and give you some indication of the slope there, looking down towards the ravine. And then swinging round again to the right of that photograph, we look down another section of the application site. As you can see, the ground is sort of slightly undulating at that point, but this part we're looking at the moment is more or less in the indicative position of the proposed house. And it slightly levels out there. Swinging round to the right of that photograph again, we see, I should have said the left, we're looking up towards the landscape beyond. This is looking in a northerly direction, but we're now, as it were, in the position of the proposed house as shown indicatively on the plans. So there'll be now a number of photographs from that sort of fairly central position in the site, Swinging round to the right in the next photograph, we look towards the burn, as it were, from that indicative position. Again, swinging round to the right of that photograph again, we now look down towards the public road and the loch beyond. And I mentioned earlier the position of the pole, the power line there. And then swinging round to the right of that photograph again, we're looking across the application site towards where Woodland is, and of course the hills beyond. Swinging round again to the right of that, we look up the slope slightly towards Tressig House. And you might notice in this photograph a star, as it were, identifying something which I'll show you in the next photograph. So if we move to the next photograph, we go up that slope a little bit to a feature, as it were, within the site. I don't have any information about this, but I just thought I ought to mention it there because it's part of the area close to the access. And then just in terms of some additional context, there's of course additional land in the applicant's ownership next door, which has this building on it, which was the subject of a prior notification application for an agricultural building. And then if we go to the next photograph, there is reference in the papers, in the applicant's papers, that is, to a barn conversion. I think this is probably the building they're referring to, but just to be clear, it's some fields away from the application site itself. So I'll maybe just leave you with the last photograph, which gives you an indication of the application site as seen from the public road. Turning now to the applicant's case, by way of introduction, the proposal is seen as an infill development within the settlement of Strathtummel, notably as the access and frontage is within the 40-mile-per-hour speed limit. The site is seen as being of a comparable size to its neighbours and could provide adequate amenity space. It is capable of accommodating a house of a similar scale and plot ratio in a manner that respects the landscape. A high-quality family house of traditional style and materials is envisaged if planning permission in principle is granted. The officer's assessment is considered to be subjective and based on conjecture instead of factual information. The site is accessed by a private road and has a road frontage similar to Tressig House. The reference to direct road frontages under Category 2 Infill Sites of the Housing and Countryside Supplementary Guidance is based on a suburban context and is not suitable to be considered against a countryside situation. Interpreting the guidance in this way is seen as stifling rural development, contrary to the spirit of central and local government planning policy. Regarding the definition of infill sites, the plot is between two houses, that is, Tressig House and Stillig, and is seen as meeting the criteria of the supplementary guidance in that context. Regarding the building group category, the group of buildings at Strathtummel has come into existence through relatively recent developments, with only the inn being present in the 1960s. The houses are located at irregular intervals, scattered and isolated, and the proposal is seen as reflecting that form of development. The building group west of the burn is Tressig House, a barn conversion, and Wood End. Responding to the placemaking policies, development at this location would be prominent due to the topography. Existing houses are seen as having set a precedent. The site is seen as screened from both directions on the public road due to existing trees. It is noted that the officer has not visited the site and, as there are no details of proposed development, the view that the dwelling would not make a positive contribution to the built and natural environment is seen as entirely subjective and indeed speculative. The prominence of the site is considered to have been exaggerated. In responding to the objections submitted in relation to the planning considerations, the house would have private treatment facilities in relation to both foul and surface water, and that would be to the required standards and would not cause any flooding issues. The site is served by an existing access, and there is no evidence that the house would not be well integrated into the landform. It is recognised that the settlement of Strathtummel is of a scattered nature. Essentially, the proposal is seen as meeting the infill category, reflects the scattered nature of the building group at Strathtummel, and complies with the placemaking policies in that it would be no more prominent than many existing houses. In that context, it is seen as making a positive contribution to the Loch Tummel National Scenic Area. The officer's assessment of the planning policy is not considered to be valid, therefore. The papers include reference to a number of proposals for dwelling houses and associated development in the Strathtummel area. These are seen as supportive in providing precedence for this proposal. Finally, the applicant has expressed concern and strong dissatisfaction with the manner in which the application has been processed due to the lack of an opportunity for pre-consultation, discussion, feedback and the submission of revisions prior to the conclusion of the officer's report and decision notice. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, the proposal falls to be assessed against Local Development Plan Policy 19 and the associated supplementary guidance concerning housing in the countryside. This proposal is not assessed as complying with the categories that would be supportive concerning building groups. There is one house to the west, that's Derrick House, and one house on the opposite side of the road, Woodland. The building group to the east is centred around the inn. This is seen as some distance away and separated by the Derrick Burn, a significant landscape feature. Regarding the Infill Sites category, the applicant's supporting statement refers to the site's position between Derrick House and Stallig. However, the wooded ravine containing the Derrick Burn intervenes between the site and the nearest house to the east, which is Stallig. This is seen as forming a significant landscape feature that separates the site from Stallig and the group of houses near the Strathtummel Inn. Derrick House does not have a frontage onto the public road, but would share the access track with the proposed site instead. It is noted that the 40-mile-an-hour sign lies to the west. The positioning of this sign has been determined on traffic safety grounds and does not have a bearing on the interpretation of planning policies. There is no existing settlement boundary at Strathtummel. The indicative siting of the proposed house is in an elevated position. As such, it is likely that it would appear prominent and is not expected to make a positive contribution to the built and natural environment of the locality in terms of the placemaking policies. Sporadic development which does not relate well to the existing building group is seen as eroding the landscape character of the Loch Tummel National Scenic Area. As such, the proposal is considered as being contrary to Local Development Plan Policies 38B and 39. As the proposal is being declined in relation to the housing and countryside policies, further information was not requested in relation to flood risk, the River Tay Special Area Conservation, digital connectivity, and zero carbon technologies. In relation to representations, 5 objections were submitted mainly concerning the preservation of private water resources, private drainage, road safety concerns, visual impact, being contrary to Local Development Plan policy, notably the site not being within a settlement boundary. In this case, convener, there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. I think I should start by introducing you. We didn't introduce you in your absence at the start of the meeting, and I know I was so pleased to have you back. I didn't do so before you started, so I might just for the benefit of those watching, Mr. Harrison is the planning advisor for local review body. He is not part of the planning department and has had no previous involvement with any of the applications on the agenda today. So good to have you back, Mr. Harrison. Now,
Thank you.
Can I ask colleagues if any questions for officers on this matter? Can I ask you, Councillor Wilson, have you any questions?
Yes, indeed, and thanks for the presentation, Mr. Harrison, and equally pleased to see you back. You mentioned in the representations that there I referenced a settlement boundary, but before that you said there isn't a settlement boundary. I'm taking it there isn't a settlement boundary for Strathtummel.
In terms of your definitions within the local development plan, you're absolutely correct. There is no settlement boundary for the purposes of interpreting the planning policy. I think the applicant has taken the view that he feels there is a scattered form of settlement, if I can put it that way, and he is interpreted that way, but no, quite clearly there is no definition of a settlement boundary in this instance.
And if I might, convener, the other issues about drainage and water supply are whilst they're relevant to our considerations, they're not totally planning issues. Some of them are infrastructure and civil issues. Am I correct in that?
Yes, essentially you are. The comments on that are really coming from third parties who, shall we say, express a concern that the development may affect the quality of the sources of their water supply, for example. And that, as you say, is fundamentally a civil matter, although you'll be well aware that very often there are informatives added to any decision notice to alert people to the prospect of that in the event of planning permission being granted.
Yes, and we would need to satisfy ourselves that there were proposals for dealing with particular effluent disposal. Private water supply is a little bit more difficult because it's very much a civil one. But the application, I think, has given proposals for these facilities, if I've read it correctly.
Only in the broadest terms, being an application in principle, we have no plans showing, for example, soakaways or the like. So they make it clear they intend to deal with that as a private matter.
Yeah, but they are mentioned in
they are indeed, yes.
And there's no specific design for the house at this stage, because it's an application in principle. But we have seen some other designs of some other properties in the area in your very helpful photographs.
No, just to confirm, no, we have no details of any prospective house, and there would be no, shall we say, commitment to any particular design, although the applicant has indicated an aspiration, if I can put it that way, that it would be of a traditional form and materials.
Yeah. Okay, I'm content for the moment, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Illingworth, have you any questions for officers on this one?
I have no questions to ask at the moment. Councillor Wilson has kindly asked lots of very interesting questions, so yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. It's never good to follow Councillor Wilson. It's always hard to find something else to say, you know.
I'm sorry, apologise.
I have a couple of questions, Mr. Harrison. Could we go back to the photograph of the building described as an agricultural building for a moment? Is that possible, Audrey? That's the one. Now, this may not be relevant, and you can tell me that, Mr. Harrison, but this building is within the applicant's ownership.
It's certainly on land shown as being within the applicant's ownership. Whether the building is or not, I don't know, but I'm assuming it would be, yes.
Right, and despite having large picture windows and a balcony, it's described as an agricultural building, is that correct?
Yes, I think on page in page 61, the applicant makes reference to this building, and there's a photograph in that as well. Where he identifies the fact that there is a consent, if I can put it that way, under the prior notification process rather than the planning application process, to shall we say, erect I think he says the erection of an agricultural store and the formation of decking which is what you're looking at, I assume,
Right.
in this photograph. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And when it comes to the burn, there's quite a number of trees involved in the burn area, which is always also part of this site. Am I right in thinking there are no protections for any of that area that could be developed as part of the garden ground? Were we minded to agree this matter?
No, the applicant has drawn the application site to, shall we say, to the centre line of the burn as his boundary, and if you were minded to grant consent, you would effectively be, shall we say, accepting that would become part of the associated ground, the garden ground of whatever house was erected.
Right, well, I think I'm happy now. Any further questions, Councillor Wilson?
Yes, I'm afraid there is. It's about the road access. There's an existing road access to the house to the west of the proposed site. Is that correct? And it's proposed to be shared?
Yes, that would be the shared access from the public road, yes.
And we've had no adverse comments from transport planning about that Bellmouth and its accessibility to the B-class road that runs through the, if I can call the Strathtumble settlement. I won't define it as a village yet, although if there's a pub in it, I think it might call it a village convener. But I couldn't find any adverse comments.
No, I note on page 50 that as far as transport planning is concerned, there was no response from transport planning. So I agree there is no adverse comment from them one way or the other.
Okay, it's difficult to read silence, convener, as a comment, but there's no comment back. Like you, convener, I'm slightly bemused by this agricultural building that looks like that has a veranda on it. I don't know if that's to allow the livestock within it to come out and enjoy the view or not. But it has a consent.
Well, the process.
That's the question, not a statement.
Yes, it has consent. I might maybe the use of the word consent is maybe slightly misleading if you're thinking of it being in the same context as a planning permission. The process for agricultural buildings is different, and it's called prior notification. And the clue, as it were, is probably in the word notification. The applicant would notify the authority of an intention to erect an agricultural building, at which point there are, shall we say, very limited circumstances in which the authority can other than accept that.
And just one final thing, convener, in terms of proximity of the proposed house, how far is it away from this agricultural building?
If you turn to page,
I've looked at the plan, but I can't quite make much definition of it.
If you turn to page 71, which is actually, in my case, is actually identified at the top rather than the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
Of the two plans you've got there, if you look at the one which is showing Strathtumble, you've got the application site and the indicative position of the house shown, and Tressig House itself.
Yes.
And in the field to the north, you see a very small square.
Okay, I think I see that, yes.
Does that help you?
That's on the actual page 71.
This is page 71, yes.
And it's the plan on the right-hand side, or one on the left-hand side?
There's one on the left-hand side, the one that identifies itself as Strathtummel. That shows the total extent of the land in the applicant's ownership. And as they north of Tressig, or slightly northwest of Tressig, there's a large field with a very small square in it, and the small square is
it's a significant distance. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's quite some distance away.
Okay, right. Thank you. If a permission was granted, it couldn't be a hen house unless you had a long way to go for the hens. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Illingworth?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Right. I think if I don't know if we have a representative of the planning service here. We usually used to have one when we had meetings in real life. It might be worth if we can feed back to transport planning that no response is to say the least unhelpful. I think, given it's an in principle application, perhaps structures and flooding are not so important. I think transport planning is a bit unfortunate that there was no response, but we can pass that back somehow, Mr. Williams, if we can. So if there are no more questions for officers, we can proceed to make a preliminary decision. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Wilson.
Convener, I'm in two minds in relation to that. I've listened very carefully to the submissions by the applicant and by the planning service, and I might have been minded to ask for a site visit, but the photographs are quite clear. They make quite clear the site's quite definite, and I think you've been to see the site, Convener, already.
I have indeed in the driving rain yesterday.
So I'm not going to formally ask for a site visit, but I wonder what this is balanced in my view, right? And I just wonder what other information might be helpful towards us that we might be able to finalise our thoughts on the subject, because there's some fairly definite planning principles about settlement boundaries, about building groups and stuff like that, and I'm just slightly, for once, at a loss to not see a clear way forward on this one, and the applicant has helpfully sent in other examples of consented either applications or consented buildings, and I think these are useful in this sense. So I'm hesitating before saying yes, we've got enough information, Convener, because I'm genuinely hesitating.
Right, Councillor, well, perhaps we will see what Councillor Illingworth and I have to say and go back to you. Yeah. So, Councillor Illingworth, are you content? You have sufficient information?
I'm content, thank you. Yes.
I have to say also, as I am content, particularly having visited the site now and had a look at how spread out the settlement in the area is, the other houses are. So I am certainly content to be of sufficient to proceed in this occasion. So back to you, Councillor Wilson.
If there is a majority view in that case, and Mr. Harrison, I don't think has said anything in response to my question, but he may, before I finally decide, Convener, he might want to give me a one-liner reply.
Right, Mr. Harrison.
I'm not quite sure what your area of concern is. Is there anything, first of all, in the photographs I could maybe take you back to, if it's to do with the topography of it, or is it more your concern about the access aspect that you raised earlier?
No, it's nothing to do with the photographs. They were extremely helpful, right. Extremely informative. The debate that's going on in my mind is between some policy issues about houses in the countryside and such, and that's been well covered. So I will accede to the majority view, Convener.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Mr. Elliott.
Yes, sorry, Convener. Just to maybe help that, I think what Councillor Wilson is referring to is what you're looking at is the housing in the countryside supplementary guidance. And there's particular reference to category 1 building groups, and when you read something out to you, it comes from the policy. This may help, but you may know, Councillor Wilson, that a building group is defined as 3 or more existing buildings of a size at least equivalent to a traditional cottage, and which when viewed within the landscape setting appear as a group. And it goes on more. It says premises which are smaller than a traditional cottage, such as small domestic garages and outbuildings, will not count towards the requirement for at least 3 buildings. There is another reference that's important in the paragraph below. Some areas are characterised by a more dispersed building pattern, where buildings appear as an obvious group within the landscape setting. Permission will be granted for new houses subject to the requirements listed in adding to a group. Where buildings are too dispersed to appear as a single group, it may be possible to break them down into sections, with each section treated as a separate group. Now, I'll not go on, there is more, but I think one of the tasks you have today is to decide if and where there is a building group and whether this is part of a building group. There is also another category, which is infill sites, which is referred to, and I'll not go through a lot of detail, but each case is on its own merits, and it depends on whether linear development is a character of the area. You know, but there is reference to plotter plots created are comparable in size to neighbouring plots and have a size similar to similar size of road frontage, and it goes on. So, but Councillor Wilson, I think you are familiar with infill plots and not being too large to constitute an infill plot. But I don't want to say too much more, but I think you're really referring to the assessment under the housing and countryside policy.
Yes, thank you.
Right, so I think, thank you very much indeed for that helpful information, Mr. Elliott. I think we are now able to proceed and assess the case. So we will move to debate, and having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth and North Local Development Plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, I will start us off. As mentioned previously, I was in Strathtunnel in the driving rain yesterday to see this site for myself, and I have to say the papers indicated that it failed to meet any of the normal tests for housing in the countryside building development. And I have to say, having been there and stood at the proposed entrance, I would have to say that certainly it would be, to say the very least, a stretch to say that it was an infill or a building group. It was quite difficult, in fact, to see some of the other buildings involved. So I was thinking it would fail that test, I think. What is indisputable, it's a lovely place to have a house, and a beautiful view from the agriculture building in the photograph and for the houses that are there already. And I can absolutely see why one would want to have a development there. But I feel on this occasion, the other slight difficulty, I suppose, in principal applications is you don't know exactly what you're getting and where the bits and pieces of drainage and so forth are going to be, which always makes it slightly more difficult. So I think really the housing in the countryside policy, some policies we have to deal with on this committee are relatively opaque, I think you could say, but I think the housing in the countryside policy is fairly clear. And certainly, having been there, it would be clear to me that this proposal fails to meet any of those tests for housing in the countryside. So I would be on this occasion again agreeing with the 2 reasons of refusal put forward by the planning officer, with a couple of bits of tidying up as ever. So, Councillor Wilson, may we have your view?
Yes, convener. As I said, I thought this application had an element of balance in it, and I still consider that. But one of the things maybe that, and we get representations, there seemed to be an awful lot of angst about how the application has been treated. I cannot argue with that. That's what the representations are, but I'm always concerned that people haven't taken advantage of the ability of the planning service to give support and advice in the application process. That's a by the way comment, convener, but there are criticism of the planning service, and I wasn't in the room at the time, so I can't make a value judgment on that, but it's always unfortunate when folk start off by saying these type of things rather than stick to purely the planning issues. I'm going to, on balance, go with the refusal, as you've articulated, convener, because I consider that the policy, the housing in the countryside policy, is important, and exceptions are rare.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Illingworth, may we have your view?
Yeah, for me, the whole of this planning application turns around on the basis of where is the settlement boundary. And looking at the map on page 71 on the left hand side, you can clearly see that effectively that Tressick House and Woodend and all the other houses in the settlement are a togetherness. And so another house would not be a separate house, it would be part of the settlement. So I would see this as an infill proposition, and so I would be in favour of the planning application going ahead. But obviously I'm in a minority again, and that's the way democracy works.
Thank you very much indeed for your view, Mr. Illingworth. Thank you. I think with regard to Councillor Wilson's point of dissatisfaction the applicant has expressed, I think it's important that while we might have some sympathy with the position he finds himself in, it is not in the gift of this particular committee to deal with that, unless you take these up separately with the planning service. It's not for us to come to a conclusion on that at this particular meeting. So I think, Mr. Elliott, we have another split decision for you there. If I could just make a couple of points with regard to refusal. I think when it refers to the Tressick Burn and the second from the end line on the first reason for refusal, I think I would like to add something with regarding the vertical and horizontal separation from the building group there, because that's quite significant in my opinion.
Okay.
I think I would like to add that in, and I think when we come to reason 2, the third last line, I would like to remove sporadic and mention that the development is in a prominent location. Although we don't know precisely what we're going to get, it's a very prominent location. So I would like to add that.
Just to recap before Councillor Wilson agrees or disagrees, I think convener in ground 1, what you're suggesting, excuse me, second last lines where it says presence of the intervening alt Tressick Burn, something along the lines of and the degree of vertical and horizontal separation, would it be from the building group to the east?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so you're being quite clear that the building group is to the east and not part of, this isn't part of the building group.
Yeah.
Then on ground 2, I think that's simpler. Third last line, it would read the proposed development in a prominent location within the NSA.
Yes, I'm happy with that. We'll just see if Councillor Wilson's in agreement.
I'm content to agree to that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. So as I say, that one has had a thorough examination, and I realise the applicant will not be the answer the applicant wanted. And I would suggest that if they're unhappy with the way they were treated by the planning service, they should take that up separately. It's not not that we are not sympathetic, this is not within our gift to deal with that today. I think, colleagues, if I might suggest we have a very quick break just now and then crack on with the last 2 papers. I think it'd be good if we were back in action at 12:30. So we'll see you all at 12. Yes, indeed, Mr. Elliott.
Yeah, just to be clear, on this particular one, it was refused to, sorry, they refused 2-1. But in relation to what Councillor Illingworth said, he does refer to a settlement boundary. Now, actually, that will be a building group. There is no settlement boundary.
Yeah, I think it's important that we have that noted, Mr. Elliott. I should have asked you. I do beg your pardon. Thank you very much indeed. We'll see you all at 12:30. Right, colleagues, I make that 12:30. I see Councillor Wilson's wardrobe, but not Councillor Wilson, so perhaps we'll give him another moment. Right, Councillor Wilson, is that you back?
1 minute, I apologise. Yeah.
That's okay, Councillor. Right, so I think we should just crack on now with item 4.2, which is a planning application for the erection of a place of worship class 10 and associated works at land 30 metres east of Castlewine, Kinfons Holdings, West Kinfons. Mr. Harrison, can I ask you to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, Convener. As you say, this is a detailed planning application for the erection of a place of worship under Class 10 and the associated works at land 30 metres east of Castlewine, Kinfons Holdings, Kinfons. The application site extends to some 0.43 hectares and access is from Castlewine. The land is currently in agricultural use for grazing. The proposal is for a single-storey timber building. Externally, it would have timber cladding and the roof would be clad in grey metal profiled roofing sheets. The accommodation would provide for a maximum of 50 people. It is anticipated that the building would only be used for 3-hour-long services per week, and these would not involve any amplified music. Parking would be provided for 13 vehicles. I'll just take you through some photographs now, but you might like to have page 136 onwards, which provides you with location plan, the site plan, and of course plans of the proposed church. So in the first photograph here, and the general sequence of the photographs will be from the A90, as you see in the photograph here, approaching from the east, then we'll see the site, and then views from the west. So I say this is us turning in off the A90, and we have Canoe Hill rising on the right hand side of the photograph and the tower associated with it in profile there, and then the site, as it were, behind the trees at the junction here. So if we move on from there into the next photograph, swinging slightly to the left, we still get a little bit of Canoe Hill, but you can see on that corner how the trees, as it were, wrap around at the junction. If we move on from there down into Castlewine a little bit, we get past the trees and we pick up the application site, obviously indicated in red here. This is Castlewine itself, and we have the various single-storey properties fronting onto Castlewine there, adjacent to the application site. So this gives you the context of the application site in relation to Canoe Hill in particular. From there, if we move to the next photograph, moving slightly to the right and a little bit further down the road, we're looking through that eastern end of the application site, and as you can to some extent, see through the bank of trees, which is just out with the application site itself, towards the traffic on the A90. Swinging slightly to the left of that photograph, again we see the application site as seen from Castle Wynd. And if we swing slightly to the left of that photograph again, we see, and slightly closer up as it were, the housing immediately on that western boundary with the application site. And this is really basically the principal position of the proposed parking and the proposed building. Moving on from there, in the next photograph, we, as it were, look at quite specifically at the boundary on that western side between the housing and the proposed Class 10 use. And then if we move on to the next photograph, we step down the road and look back towards the application site. So we're looking in an easterly direction, past the last bungalow, as it were, adjacent to the application site. And again, you can see the context in relation to the rising ground on the opposite side of the A90 at that point. Moving on from there, in the next photograph, I'll just leave you with that because it gives you an indication of the more accurate position of the house, beg your pardon, not the house, the church building and parking area. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, by way of background, this proposal was previously declined by the local review body in November 2020. It is considered that the 3 reasons for refusal are addressed by this amended proposal. The proposal would provide a meeting place for a maximum of 50 members drawn from the immediate locality. It is seen as providing a wider benefit to the community of Kinfons, as well as meeting the Trust's ambition for a Brethren Hall in this location as a satellite to its main church at Bridge of Erne. The services do not involve amplified music or singing, and the hall is not used for social gatherings. It is noted that there are no objections from neighbours or the planning consultees. Regarding the first reason for refusal, the land is too small to be economically viable for agricultural purposes. Only some 18% of the area would be developed due to the reduction in the proposed parking provision. The remainder would be able to function as open space as allocated in Local Development Plan 2. Local Development Plan Policy 14A Part B, that concerns open space retention and provision, accepts the loss of open space where only a minor part of the area is involved. The proposal is not seen as eroding the landscape buffer between West Kinfons and the A90. The undeveloped area of the field would contain landscaping and would be maintained. Regarding the second reason for refusal concerning Policy 39, landscape, the proposal is not seen as being detrimental to the views from Canoe Hill due to its small scale, timber walls, dark grey roof, and the landscape buffer between the A90 and the presence of also West Kinfons. Views to Canoe Hill would be dominated by the existing housing and the A90. The proposed hall has been aligned with the adjoining houses. It is seen as being of modest scale and simple form. Regarding the third reason for refusal concerning policy, regarding the third reason for refusal concerning policy 60B, new development proposals, the proposal seeks to provide a facility for local members of the congregation who would not then need to travel to Bridge of Erne. The development is not considered to be a significant traffic generator due to its capacity and the anticipated low level of use. It is anticipated that many visitors would share cars or travel by foot or cycle. Since the previous proposal, the number of parking spaces has been reduced by more than half, and cycle racks have been provided and included within the proposal. It is acknowledged that the bus service to West Kinfons is infrequent. However, it is noted that a major park and ride facility is envisaged for this locality. This can be expected to improve the current bus service. In conclusion, the proposal is seen as complying with all of the LDP2 policies that are cited in the reasons for refusal. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, the site is located within the settlement boundary of Kinfons. In residential areas such as this, community facilities are generally supported. However, the site is specifically designated as open space under Policy 14, which presumes against development. The site is considered to have visual amenity value, defining the settlement edge and providing separation with the dual carriageway. The designation of this site was revisited during the recently considered local development plan examination, when the council stated, "Open space is not simply about providing usable areas for recreation. It can also be an area of green space that provides breathing space between urban areas, creating landscape settings for settlement edges. In this case, whilst the area of land is not exceptional for any specific use, recreational or scenic, it does provide a buffer between the busy dual carriageway and the quiet back road that leads through Kinfons. Removal of this designation, whilst retaining it in the settlement boundary, would mean that development of this site could take place. The development of this area would create a new, more urban entrance off the busy road, changing the visual entrance to the settlement. Furthermore, this site is located so close to the A90 that noise pollution could be an issue." That's the end of the quotation. The reporter agreed with this view and the designation remained in the plan. Policy 14A allows for the development of a minor part of the site designated for open space where this does not affect its continued use as an amenity resource. The revision to the siting of the building and some landscaping is noted. However, the development continues to be seen as compromising the open space designation. The primary use of the land would become a place of worship for the congregation, despite the suggestion that the land may be open to use by the public. The proposal is seen as changing the open character of the land and having an adverse impact on the visual amenity and landscape buffer between the A90, Trunk Road and West Kinfons. As such, the revised proposal is seen as continuing to be contrary to LDP2 Policy 14A, and it would result in the loss of an area of designated open space of amenity value. Regarding Policy 60, Transport Standards and Accessibility Requirements for New Development Proposals, this aims to ensure that uses that involve significant travel generation are easily accessible by walking, cycling and public transport to reduce travel demand by car. The capacity to accommodate 50 people could be considered significant for Kinfons. The accessibility of this site cannot be described as good. Bus services are infrequent and unrelated to the times of the church services. The location is not considered to be sufficiently accessible by modes of transport other than private car. It is noted that the level of formal car parking provision has been reduced since the previous proposal. Concerning design and layout, the proposed timber building is functional and of no particular architectural merit. It is not viewed as creating an attractive entrance to West Kinfons. Regarding landscape, the site is within the Sidlaw Hill Special Landscape Area next to Canoe Hill. While there is some existing landscaping along the A90 trunk road boundary, the site is generally open. Some additional landscaping is proposed, but this is not seen as fundamentally altering the visual impact of the development, as the development would erode the open nature of the site and the entrance to West Kinfons. The site is designated as open space to preserve the existing open aspect with views to Canoe Hill behind the site. The proposal is seen therefore as contrary to Policy 39, as it does not safeguard the visual amenity of this part of West Kinfons. Finally, concerning residential amenity, it's recognising that places of worship can be a source of noise disturbance to adjoining housing from traffic and music, although this could be the subject of a planning condition. Similarly, the proposal does not raise insurmountable concerns in relation to flood risk, access or drainage. In this case, there are no representations. However, there is a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions for officers in this application for review? Councillor Illingworth?
I have no questions at the moment, thank you.
Councillor Wilson?
And I have no questions either, Convener.
Right. I have one perhaps of clarification from you, either you, Mr. Harrison, or possibly you, Mr. Elliott. If we were minded to grant the Class 10 use for this building, would I be right in thinking we would then have no control over what activities took place there, notwithstanding the applicant's contention that it's only going to be used very infrequently during the week?
If I could respond to that,
yes,
yes, you're correct. The use of the building in terms of the frequency of the number of services or events, provided they were, shall we say, within the same use, then no, that would be a matter of discretion for the applicant or any future occupant.
That's fine. Thank you very much indeed for that. So I have no further questions. Colleagues, are you both content?
Could I ask?
Yes, indeed,
Mr. Harrison. Could you define for anybody listening in what a Class 10 permission entails?
Yes, how can I put it? In planning, there can be a number of classes within which a number of similar uses can take place without requiring an applicant or the owner to go back to the planning authority. So these, shall we say, types of uses are grouped under different classes. If it assists you, I can read out what the scope, if I can put it that way, of Class 10 covers. It covers a creche, a day nursery, a day centre, provision of education, a museum, an exhibition hall, a public library, something for the display of art, obviously for public worship or religious instruction, or social activities of a religious body. So assuming consent was being granted, for example, if somebody decided they wish to make it a day centre or a nursery, they wouldn't have to come back and seek permission afresh. They would be able to do that without having to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Are you happy with that, Councillor Illingworth?
That was very helpful, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I think, colleagues, we can now proceed to make a preliminary decision. So can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Wilson?
I think with sufficient information, thank you.
sufficient information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I too am happy to proceed. So we'll now assess the case and move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Wilson, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth and Ross local development plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off?
Thanks, Convener. Yes, I'm very familiar with the site. In fact, it used to be a part of the old orchard for the castle, Kinfauns Castle, until the orchard was destroyed by the building of a dual carriageway in the 1960s. But that's historical. But this was a wee bit of the tail end of the orchard that got stranded on one side of the dual carriageway compared with the wee bit that got stranded on the other side, and it's been open space ever since. There has been development at Kinfauns, I think we're all aware of that, but the issue is one of principle. Do we keep this as open space? In fact, it would make a lovely orchard and recreational area, I think. Two things I don't agree with at all about the planning report. One is that it's easily be accessible by bicycle, both from Kinfauns area and the town. You'll be, Convener, well familiar with that. It's fairly easy to get to. But also, in fairness, the issues in the report about noise would not apply to the proposed use as a gospel hall. There is one of these establishments quite near our home here, and they cause no noise issue whatsoever. But that apart, I think the crunch question here is, do we allow development here? Do we keep it as open space and as green space? And there's enough pressure on our green and open spaces already. I acknowledge that the applicants have tried to pull the building forward, reduce the car parking and allow the rest of the field to go, but to remain. However, the paddock, maybe call it, but that is beside the point. There is an erosion a significant erosion of the green space, and I think it's something that should be enhanced and continued in the future as green space. So I would go with the report, and I'll refer to the reasons for refusal once we know what other members of the panel think, Convener.
Right, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Illingworth, may we have your view?
Yeah, thank you. I'm quite torn about this. I don't accept the argument that this building will generate traffic, and if we were to use that role for any planning application, nothing would ever get built. I'm not sure that it's a significant loss of open space, but having looked at the design of the building and seen the building of a similar building in Bridge of Erne, I think it has poor visual impact, and on that basis I'd be in favour of going with the planning department.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Illingworth. I think for the first time in a while we're all in agreement here, I think. I have no disagreement with any of the reasons for refusal. I have to say, having been there the other day, although it would appear to be in the middle of the countryside, it's a little bit constrained by the railway, the motorway and the River Tay, as well as the other houses. And I think it's very important that there are some areas of that local green space for all communities. I feel also that the local review body cannot really set aside the provisions of the LDP lightly, certainly. And on this occasion, both the LDP authors and the reporter agree that this type of open space is very, very important to our communities. So on that basis, I agree with my colleagues, and I would go with the three reasons for refusal, although I understand Councillor Wilson may wish to do a little bit of tidying up. So, Councillor Wilson.
Yes, thanks, Convener, and thanks, Councillor Illingworth. It's a wee bit more than tidying up, because I agree with the reasons for refusal number one, as printed on page 149. I agree with reason number two, but I cannot agree with reason three, because there's clearly there is a bus service, but the services are not compatible. That I understand that, but it's clearly accessible by bicycle from Perth City and from the wider Conforns area. And in fact, there's a pathway along the length of the dual carriageway from Conforns village, if I can put it that way. So I cannot agree with the reason refusal 3. If my colleagues want to disagree with me about that, then they're open to do that.
Right. May we have your views on whether you disagree or not, Councillor Lingworth?
I'm happy to go with Councillor Wilson's suggestions.
Thank you. I think in view that we have a consensus on 2, I too am happy, although I am concerned about the Class 10 use, because my recent experience, for instance, of a day nursery that I go to collect my grandson from time to time, it seems to generate an inordinate amount of traffic. And I think the fact we have no real control over what might happen to this building in the future, I would have thought that reason 3 would be important, but I'm perfectly content to, as we're all in agreement with the first 2, to go simply with the first 2, Mr. Elliott. Do you have everything you require there, can I ask?
Yes, Convener, I think to be clear, that a unanimous refusal on the same grounds as the appointed officer, grounds 1 and 2, but not 3. And yes, Convener, it is better that you all agree the grounds, otherwise you have separate decisions being taken. But I think it's clear refuse on 1 and 2.
Yes, I think given 1 and 2 are so clear, I'm happy to go with that, Mr. Elliott. So that's a unanimous decision on this occasion. I realise this will not be the result the applicant was looking for, but I think we've given it a good bit of consideration here and put forward particularly the LDP reasons as to why we must refuse it. So we can now move on, I think, to the last item for today, item 4.3, which is a planning application for the erection of a dwelling house and formation of vehicular access at land 50 metres northeast of Derrick and Perth Road in Burnham. So, Mr. Elliott, sorry, I beg your pardon, Mr. Harrison, may I ask you to introduce this application for review? You're on mute, Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, as you say, this is a detailed planning application for the erection of a house and formation of vehicular access at land 50 metres northeast of our Derrick, Perth Road in Burnham. The site is a generally triangular area of land extended to some 830 square metres. Around half of the site comprising a steep slope containing mature trees. The other half is an area of open grass. The site lies adjacent to a lay-by beside Perth Road. The site also forms part of the garden ground of a 2-storey house that is under construction. Access would be through the northern end of the lay-by. The proposed house envisaged is of a traditional design with exposed eave, wet ash rendered walls, slate roof and painted timber windows. Now I'd like to take you through some photographs now, but you might like to have page 199 onwards, which provide you with a location plan and site plan and drawings of the proposed house. The general sequence of the photographs will be, as you see in this one, approaching from the south, then the house under construction and the site from the public road, and then the site and the wooded embankment that is elevated from the public footpath slightly to the north of the site. So I say this is us approaching from the south, looking in a northerly direction down Perth Road, the red line giving a general indication of the position of the site. And we have the Burnham Hotel, which is obviously a major feature on the right-hand side of the photograph here, and the Beatrix Potter Gardens on the left-hand side of the photograph. So if we move on to the next photograph, we see the Burnham Hotel itself. And from there, if we move up the road a little bit, say getting close to the site, we're still getting the impressive gates there and the listed building on the opposite side of the road, Lindisfarne. And of course, we're seeing the steeply sloping roof of the house which is under construction immediately adjacent to the application site. and behind that you see the embankment with the woodland to the rear, to that western side, as it were. So if we move from there further up the road in the next photograph, we see the land slightly to the left of the house that's under construction here. It's actually the house under construction is in the applicant's ownership as well. And then we pick up Ladywell Cottages, it's a listed building on that left-hand side of this photograph. And then if we move to the next photograph, swinging slightly to the right, we see the house under construction, the woodland behind it, and the outline of the application site. Swinging slightly to the right of that photograph again, we can still catch the application site and just the corner of the house under construction, but this is to give you an indication that while we have the traditional buildings on the opposite side of the road I mentioned earlier, we also have a new build development immediately opposite the application site itself. Swinging slightly to the left of that photograph, just give you a little bit more detail of the position of the proposed house relative to the house under construction as seen on this side of the road, as it were. And you can see we're also looking down the pavement to a couple of cars parked in the lay-by, if that helps to orientate you that way as well. So if we move on to the next photograph, we get the application site as mentioned, and we're just catching the corner of the house under construction. So that will give you an indication of the trees to the rear, as it were, of the application site and actually on the embankment, which is part of the application site. You may pick up also in this photograph on the extreme right-hand side of the photograph a slope going up, which is the footpath which takes you around the back of the trees. So if we move on from that photograph, just to, as I would say, to reorientate you and look in the opposite direction, as it were. Obviously, we're looking across the lay-by here towards the house under construction, and then a little bit further beyond that, Ladywell Cottages. So if we move on from that photograph into the next photograph, just to get a little bit more of a detail of the relationship between the house under construction and the boundary of the application site. This is the gable of the new house, and I say that immediately joining land to that gable. Swinging slightly to the right of that photograph, we're looking basically across the position of the proposed access into the application site. And then swinging round again, in the next photograph we step up that little footpath that I mentioned earlier, and we can look back down across the application site towards the gable of the house under construction, and you can see where as it were, the break and slope is between the relatively level area immediately adjacent to the lay-by and the public road, and then the break and slope as you go into the wooded area, which slopes up from the lower part of the application site. Moving on from that to the next photograph, so we just step up that path a little bit further, right to you can just catch the corner of the steps which start to take you up the footpath, and we'll go around the back of the application site in subsequent photographs. This is just to show you the site looking towards the gable as it fronts onto Perth Road, and you can just pick up the cars parked in the lay-by there as well. So if we move on from there, going up the back of the application site, this is now behind the application site on that path that runs along the rear, looking down towards the lay-by. You can pick up the modern housing built immediately opposite the application site in this photograph too. And then if we carry on from there, from that path up to Stell Park, we're still looking down into the application site from that more elevated position. And if we move on again to the next photograph, we're still going up the application site boundary at the more elevated position, looking through the trees towards the modern development on the opposite side of the road. And then again, going slightly to the right of that, further up the path again, looking down to try and catch the gable of the house under construction, looking through to some of the older properties and also some of the modern property on the opposite side of the road. So that's basically the boundary between the house that's under construction and the application site. And finally, just to go a little bit further and to the right of that photograph, we're looking at the rear area of the house under construction. And you can see that it also has a steep slope with trees on it. And if we move on to the next photograph, step back onto the road, Perth Road again, just to give you a view across the lay-by towards the gable of the new house. In the further distance, Ladywell Cottages itself, and then, I say, on the right-hand side of the photograph, you can see the bank of trees which form the rear part of the application site. And then, if we move on from that photograph, I'll just leave you with that general photograph of the site. Turning first of all to the applicant's case, in terms of background, permission was granted for 3 houses on garden ground associated with Ladywell Cottage in 2010. That permission has expired. Permission was subsequently granted for 1 house on the site in 2019. That development has been implemented, and the current proposal involves the development of a house within its garden ground, which forms part of the original site. The site is also part of an area designated as amenity open space in the current local development plan under Policy 14, Open Space Retention and Provision. The designation is seen as erroneous and burdensome as it post-dates the granting of the planning permission in 2019. This history is seen as a material consideration and should be viewed as being outweighing the local development plan open space policy designation. The application site lies within the Burnham Conservation Area, and there are listed buildings nearby. Regarding the prospective loss of open space, it is noted that the Council's conservation section considered the visual impact of the proposal is likely to be minimal. Regarding residential amenity, this proposal, together with the consented house, is effectively the same as the original proposal for 3 houses. As the original consent was acceptable, this proposal is not seen as an overdevelopment with insufficient rear garden ground. The 84 square metres of rear garden and 15-metre depth exceeds the Council's placemaking guidance of 80 square metres and 9 metres respectively. The consented house would enjoy the same extent of rear garden ground. Regarding the loss of public parking capacity, the proposed access is at the narrow north end of the lay-by, where there is insufficient width to accommodate a parked car. There is considered to be sufficient on-street parking in the locality. The proposed access would have satisfactory visibility, and it is commonplace for entry and egress to be taken between parked vehicles, in this case in the lay-by. It is considered that the proposed access arrangement is satisfactory and accords with Local Development Plan Policy 60B. Attention is drawn to the retention of trees within the site. The only loss of trees would be the 2 trees at the access. Other trees could be protected by a planning condition. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, the applicant is seeking to subdivide the plot to accommodate a second house. The site is designated as an area of open space within the current local development plan. Under Policy 14, there is a presumption against the loss of open space to development unless 1 or more criteria are met. The permission granted for the house currently under construction was granted prior to the open space designation on the basis that a single house being approved. While this house will have an impact on the extent of green space and significant area remains, there is a significant area that can remain which would contribute to the sense of place of the locality. It is considered that this would be lost if a further house was permitted. In that context, the proposal is seen as being contrary to Policy 14A Criteria B, due to the impact on the character and amenity of the area. The site lies within the Burnham Conservation Area. Just over half of the existing house plot is a steeply sloping bank containing mature woodland that is protected due to its location within the Burnham Conservation Area. The house enjoys a level garden area of some 470 square metres, which is seen as generous but not unusual for a house of this size. The proposal would reduce that area to some 84 square metres, which is considered to be very small for such a substantial house. Both rear gardens of the existing and proposed houses would be overshadowed by the wooded embankment. It is anticipated that the proposal would create pressure for the trees to be thinned or removed to the detriment of the conservation area. No details have been provided regarding the existing trees, the habitat they provide, and any prospective impacts during construction. Consequently, the proposal is seen as contrary to Policy 40 and 41 of the Local Development Plan. In conclusion, the proposal is viewed as an overdevelopment of the overall site, resulting in a poor standard of private amenity space for both the house under construction and the current proposal. Despite some repositioning of the proposed access, Transport Planning remain concerned that the proposal could still impact on the car parking capacity of the lay-by on Perth Road. It is noted that vehicles parked in the lay-by would obstruct visibility for cars exiting the proposed access to a greater or lesser extent. It is considered that the access proposal would be contrary to Local Development Plan Policy 60B, transport standards and accessibility requirements. By themselves, the design and materials of the proposed house and parking provision is seen as acceptable. Similarly, the standard of built development is seen as satisfactory in relation to the character and appearance of the conservation area. In this case, there are no representations. However, there is a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions, Mr. Harrison, this application for review? Councillor Illingworth?
I have no questions, thank you, Convener.
Councillor Wilson?
No questions from me, Convener.
I have one, perhaps, and I note reference is made to previous applications to build here, including one for up to 3 houses. Can I just be sure that the applicant for the house under construction is the same as the applicant for the proposed house today?
My understanding it is one and the same person, yes.
Yeah, and they have chosen to apply twice, as it were, rather than to do it all at once.
That would appear to be the sequence, yes.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. So I think we can now make a preliminary decision, members. So can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Miss Councillor Illingworth.
Like Councillor Wilson before, I am deeply torn about the need to defer for more information on parking capacity, the impact of parked cars, a habitat survey or a tree survey. So I will go with the majority.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. Well, although there was a request for a site visit, we actually had one last week because we were in the vicinity anyway, and I think thanks to Mr. Harrison for guiding us towards that, because it was useful to use our time. there, we had a very thorough look at the site. The applicants won't want to hear what I'm about to say, but I think this is an afterthought. There was an application for 3 years. It's not before us today, but I think that might have worked. But to try and squeeze this house.
You need to be careful. You're not into debate at the moment. You're only being asked whether to proceed or not.
Oh yeah, sorry. Right. Okay.
You've gone on to mute, Councillor Wilson.
That might be an advantage. I
Yeah.
apologise, convener. My concentration wandered on to making comments. I'll correct myself. Thank you, Mr. Eilert. I think we have sufficient information to proceed.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And I too think we have sufficient information. So we will assess the case and move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Wilson, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth and North Local Development Plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off?
Thank you. And I noticed Councillor Illingworth deferred to ourselves. Having had the advantage of the site visit, which we did last week, we were able to look at this site in a good deal of detail. I think the previous application for 3 houses may have worked, but that's not what's before us. We have a house under construction, and we've got a request for an additional house, which is, in my view, personal opinion at this stage, convener, being squeezed into the corner. And I think that's unfortunate for the amenity of the existing house and the proposed house. I think that leaving aside the potential argument about trees, that 1 or 2 trees are due to come down, but of potential damage to trees during construction, and also trimming of trees at the very least after construction, I think the nature of the site, given the proximity and density of the trees, is one that would be shaded for an awful lot of the year. It certainly would be in the afternoon and the evening, and we see the trees now that are in half leaf, if I can describe that. If they're in full leaf, then the site would be very shaded. But I think it's just trying to squeeze a house in to too small a site, to the detriment of the, as I've said earlier, the existing house and the proposed house, and I would go with the reasons for refusal.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Illingworth, may we have your view?
Would it be possible to go after you, Councillor Simpson?
By all means, Councillor Illingworth. I think, although that leaves you with, in effect, the casting vote, but I'm happy to proceed because I agree on this occasion with Councillor Wilson. I feel that it is strikes me as being a bit of an afterthought. I think had the whole site been considered as one, that would have been a different. Obviously, it was not what we're being asked to look at today, but it would have made the decision that much easier. But I think I'm not persuaded to disagree with any of the reasons for refusal given here. I feel it does look a bit like a squeezed-in afterthought, and I would have concerns about so much of the garden ground being the steeply wooded bank. And also, of course, it could be that some of the reasons put forward for permission being granted for the building that's presently under construction in the photograph, some of those reasons refer to the garden ground, which would now be eroded if we were minded to agree this one. So I'm afraid on this occasion I am minded to agree with Councillor Wilson and to agree also with the reasons of refusal on page 195. So Councillor Illingworth, may we have your view now?
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I think it would have been impossible to give permission for this proposal to go ahead without information that I mentioned earlier. So that's why I sort of deferred and waited to find out what the other 2 of you support. With the information that we would have asked for, I would have been in favour of this proposal. This is a highly urbanised site. I know it's a small village, but it's a highly urbanised site. There are new houses being built across the road with smaller gardens than are being proposed here. If you look at the information, the diagram from page 202, it looks to me that, okay, both properties would have small gardens, relatively small gardens, but they would be adequate, and I would have been in favour. But given that I would have been in a minority position, I'm happy to accept that democracy rules in this case.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I just be absolutely clear? You're in agreement with Councillor Wilson and I on this occasion? You're on mute, Councillor.
Yes,
so Mr. Elliott can get the minute.
I'm going to go along with the majority decision. Yes, I am in agreement.
Thank you very much indeed. So I think, Mr. Elliott, we have the three of us in agreement, even if only just on this one. Can I ask you, Councillor Wilson, have you any other further comments to make regarding? There are 5 reasons for refusal in the paper. Have you anything further to add?
I'm happy with the 5 reasons.
Well, I would say my only issue is once again the use of the word adopted throughout the document, Mr. Elliott. If you can remove the adopted in front of a local plan bit, I think that's in every paragraph, I think.
Are members content with that?
And if that is sufficient information for you, Mr. Elliott, I think we can conclude today's proceedings.
Yeah, just to be clear in Councillor Illingworth's position, I appreciate what you were saying. You would have had to defer at the beginning when we were asked to proceed to get that information. But from what you said, well, of course, that information isn't before you, and therefore, partly because you might have been, of course, you would need to assess the information, and you're saying you would have granted it. However, it isn't before you, and as a consequence, you are agreeing with the terms of refusal. So I think that would be the best way to put it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Elliott. That's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, we all appreciate how you're here to keep us right, Mr. Elliott. Thank you very much indeed for that intervention. Have anything further to add in this paper, Mr. Elliott?
Nothing. It's just simply refused with the word adopted taking out of the 5 reasons for refusal.
Right, so I say once again, the applicant will not have had the answer they were looking for, but we have examined this site carefully and we've all been there and had a good look round. So I think we've given it a good airing again. So thank you all very much indeed to everyone for attendance. I'm sorry for the technical hitches at the beginning, and we'll see you all next month for the next LRB. Thank you very much indeed for your attendance.